Okay, so this is a lecture on Humanism, the Revolution, and the Neoclassical. Okay, and so we're going to get to the share screen. And here we go. I'm going to share that screen. And here we go. Let's see, there we go. All right, and first what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over a little review of a critique of the Enlightenment before we go further. Because the critique of Enlightenment is very important when it comes out to when we see like the outcomes from the Enlightenment. Okay. And there are some critiques of the Enlightenment in the lectures on the Enlightenment lectures, but I want to make it more kind of how to say more focused here because we have a lot of great ideas about democracy, government, political science ideas. Okay, what is the role of, I'm going to say man in government, okay, and because they focused on men, okay, and that's going to come up here in the critique as well, okay. And so a lot of the contradictions of the Enlightenment or the inconsistencies of the Enlightenment will have its influences on the revolutions that are going to come up, okay. And so, yeah, the Enlightenment is not consistent when it comes to race and bias, ethnic bias and race, okay? Many people will say that we can't judge people back then by our own standards, but even when we look at their own standards and their own ideas, and they're contradictory and inconsistent from what they talk about, what they say. Okay, one of the most biggest contradictions I can really think about is, and I can point to, and it's also in your Enlightenment book as well. Here is it's in the chapter. Let's see here. What's the name of that chapter? Because sometimes it changes between the different editions. In chapter 5, we have exploration, cross-cultural contact, and the ambivalence of the Enlightenment. That's chapter 5. And then chapter 6, when people are property, the problem of slavery in the Enlightenment. Okay, and that's in your Utrecht book, those chapters. They really point out the contradictions of the Enlightenment. Okay. And they talk about Thomas Jefferson, but I'm going to talk a little bit more. Okay. So again, there are ideas that they will come up about slavery, about race, about bias, is really going to contradict and they're already established ideas. Okay. And they're going to come up with a whole other like excuses and ways to sidestep and to get around their own ideas that they created. Okay, so here John Locke, he came up with the idea of the noble savage. Okay, and he's going, which is complicated and problematic, or is problematic in its own use. Okay, and so the noble savage here is saying that he's looking at indigenous peoples, particularly in the Americas, and he's saying that they live closer to nature, and that because they're more like natural man and live according to natural law. Okay, and he said this about indigenous peoples. They're more simple, is what he states, which is very complicated and problematic, and kind of completely overlooks like how can I say very complex societies like the Aztec Empire, where there was hierarchy and there was a a complex civilization and complex culture and writing. Okay, so yeah, but he's using this idea of the noble savage to build other complex ideas, such as our arguments for unalienable rights, the consent to be governed, and that all men are equal. Okay, and these become the basis of Thomas Jefferson's work, the Declaration of Independence, which will come later on in this lecture. And all of these ideas, unalienable rights, consent to be governed, all men are created equal, are all contradictions with colonization and slavery. Okay, and so here we come to Jefferson. Okay, and Jefferson, as a young lawyer, he argued for individual manumission. I mean, individual, like gradual and individual freedom from slavery for African Americans. Okay, that were enslaved, and he would do this in the state of Virginia, the Congress, and he always came up with a lot of how can I say, opposition, because Virginia was a slave state that was based on tobacco plantations. And then he himself also depended on owning slaves, although he did believe that slavery was evil and that it ruined both the slave master and the slaves. It was both evil for both people, both people. He how can I say, I think he rationalized it as a necessary evil for the economy. Okay, and again, he himself relied on slaves. He'd gone to debt twice because he spent so much money on books and wine, and yeah, so he went into debt twice. And part of what paid off those debts was, one, selling off those books, okay, and two was he had owned about approximately 200 slaves or enslaved peoples. And so and at his death, he had no money for his one surviving child. Okay, and so they had to auction off in his the enslaved people, except for the children that he had sired with Sally Hemings. Okay, so the children that he had with Sally Hemings were his own children, and he had made, supposedly he had made a deal with her that, and this is just, how can I say, this is very disturbing, that, and it's really hard to say, but he supposedly had made a deal with her. I don't know how much of this would be consensual, because she was a slave and she was his property. And how much can you call it consent if you are, if it's for the freedom of your own children. Okay, so he supposedly he had made a deal with her. For her to be like a concubine, okay, or his mistress. Okay, however, again, there's all sorts of issues of consent. Did it really happen that way? Does she have much room or opposition to say no? Okay, but in the end, the only enslaved peoples that were not auctioned off after his death were the children that he had with Sally Hemings. Okay. And I think this is very important to know and to understand that, we should not put people up on a pedestal. We can value some of their words and the influence of some of their words. We can value some of the ideas that they have contributed, but also know that, that along with those, with their contributions, there are critiques that we should have. Okay. And so, and I would say, there are contradictions, inconsistencies, and know that, how can I say, that they did really bad things too. Okay. Like really bad things. So, yeah, I can't even say how bad that is. Okay. There's just no end to how bad that was. Okay. And so, again, we have to recognize the limitations and not absolutely put them on a pedestal. Okay. Before evidence of him having relations with Sally Hemings, a lot, we finally got DNA evidence about this, and there was some, how could I say, written evidence, witness testimony from his political adversaries, but that was always questionable. Okay. So the DNA test confirmed what his political adversaries had put into writing during campaign seasons. Okay. And before we had DNA evidence, there were a lot of historians. Remember, Robert Burns has a documentary of Thomas Jefferson. And this one historian, female, older woman, she say, "Oh, he was a moral man. He could have never done that." And I'm thinking, "Ooh, lady, we think we know who people are, but we really many times we don't." And with history, new information, new evidence always comes up, and we find out something that is disturbing of people that were put on pedestals as heroes. Okay. So, even also Voltaire. Okay. Voltaire had a lot of ideas and really good points. And however, he also, he talks a lot of his writing is about religious freedom and pointing up, how religious dogma can be oppressive, or it can be a way to hurt and harm people, okay, and limit people's freedom. However, he himself, and if you can see in some of his writings, like Candide, Candide's love interest, she ends up as the concubine of a Jewish merchant, or I think it was a Jewish merchant, a very wealthy Jewish man. And that depiction is very anti-Semitic. And Voltaire was also very anti-Jewish. So he's this guy, he talks about religious freedom, but at the same time, he's very anti-Jewish. And he makes, how can I say, he lost money on the stock market. He blamed it on Jewish people, and he at a time period when a lot of other philosophers were saying, like, Judaism is a person's religion and ethnicity, but it doesn't really say, like, like there's no inherited traits of being Jewish. Okay, and he was the opposite. He would argue that there were negative traits to being Jewish, and that is very anti-Semitic, like very anti-Semitic. Okay, and so yeah, so even with Voltaire, there are a lot of problems. Also, and I pointed this up in the lecture too, is he has a lot of critique of Madame Théona as for her adultery. However, he himself was an adulterer, okay? And he had like a 20-year affair and moved in with the Marquis de Châtelet, and moved in with her and built a whole wing on her property, okay, or her husband's property at that time. Okay, so because women a lot of times were not allowed to own property, they lived with their husbands. They either belonged to their husbands or belonged to their fathers, or they went from their fathers to being their husbands. That was the reality for women during this time period too, in the 1700s. And so yeah, so Voltaire himself has a lot of contradictions that we should be very mindful of. Okay. And then we also see this with gender as well. During that time period, there were people who were saying, women are equal in intelligence, and women need the opportunity to have an equal education. Okay, Condorcet, the Wollstonecraft, Olympe de Gouges, they all argue that women have a place in public life, politics, in intellectual life, and they should be given those opportunities and education as well. Equal education. Okay, with the education, with the expectation that women are going to do something with it. All right. And so, yeah, so even in the founding of our nation, many times we don't recognize even the contributions of, and this is part of the contradiction, is that we don't recognize the contributions of Native Americans to the structure and founding of a federalist type of government. So we have a layered government. We have a local government, we have a state government, and then we have a federal national government. And this idea of a layered government comes from the Iroquois Confederation. Okay? And the founding fathers were very aware of the Iroquois Confederation because they did business with them. And, did business with them, talked to them as a separate government, and were aware of the structure of their government and use that as part of the structure that we have in our own government. Okay. And so again, for every unit, not just the Enlightenment, but for every unit, there are wonderful gems of ideas. But many times, these thinkers and these creators, they are not without critique. Okay. They're very flawed, and sometimes just saying that they're very flawed is extremely mild. Okay. Sometimes they're beyond as very flawed. Okay. But we need to also, there are contributions that are good contributions, and there are contributions that maybe they're not good or bad, but they're very influential. Okay, or it could be argued just how good or bad they are. So we also have to think about that too. Go, is that contribution really good? Is it really bad? How does it influence our modern life? Okay. And so, yes, I wanted to go over those things before we come to the humanism revolution and the neoclassical. Okay. And we need to think about the extent of how much did the Enlightenment impact these revolutions, and how much was it also economic as well? Right? Are people going to go to war for ideas, or ideas going to be the language and the structure for which people will voice themselves? Okay, because they can just say, "Hey, look, there's these, there might be, people usually want to have stability, but only until things get really desperate are they going to just get mad and be frustrated and angry. And what pushes them to that is, many times is when they don't have anything more, or anything, they have nothing to lose. Okay. So I personally think it is economic drivers that force people to revolution and to change. And ideas of the Enlightenment is that language that they can use to say, hey, this is wrong. Okay. The perceptions of the new republics. So here we go. Okay. For your second paper, I do have a video for your second paper, but I also want to go through this here too because I have it into the lecture. I have a more detailed one for your video thing for your second paper. But we have Edmund Burke, and he's going to do Reflections of the Revolution in France. Edmund Burke, and it's really important to read the introduction to Edmund Burke, those first 2 pages. Excuse me. And because it sets up the timeline, and it sets up where he's going and what he's looking at and what is his background. Those are all important things to how he talks about the French Revolution. Okay, so he's an Englishman. He's an Englishman of of upper society. Okay, aristocratic background. Okay, and he is traveling to France just right after the French Revolution and right before the Reign of Terror. Okay, right in that time period. And he is someone, in there, how can I say, he's going to talk about nature, what is natural. And it's going to be a different definition than John Locke. Okay. And Edmund Burke's not talking about, nature as in trees and earth and everything. No, he's talking about what they are accustomed to for centuries. He's saying this is natural for people of inheritance to be leaders of government. When he talks about people of inheritance, like inheritance of land, especially, he's talking about aristocratic people. And he's going to argue it's natural for them to be leaders of government, meaning that it has always been this way and it should be this way. And so he's talking about natural. He's talking about what Europe has been accustomed to for centuries. Okay, which is this feudal relationship of government that he's talking about. Okay, so keep that in mind, please, when you do read him. And his language is complicated. I recommend underlining phrases and words and summarizing paragraphs. Read a paragraph and kind of like try to summarize what it is saying. Okay. And if you have complications with like words or phrases, like underline it and look it up. Okay. Because he is not an easy read. Okay, this is probably the most challenging of papers, paper 2. And after that, it's papers 3 and 4 get much less challenging in terms of diction. Okay. Alexis de Tocqueville. Okay. He's going to talk about democracy in America. And Alexis de Tocqueville, he is working, I think he's working as, a bureaucrat in the new French government. And this is in like the 1830s. And this is when we have constitutional monarchy reestablished. I need to put my phone on silent. There we go. Sorry. All right. And so yes. So here we go. So Alexis de Tocqueville, he is a bureaucrat during the, I think, around 1830s, 1820s, when constitutional monarchy has been reestablished. It's after Napoleon has been sent away, okay, defeated and sent away, and he is coming to America, or to the United States, United States of America, and he is noting, he's taking notes, he's noting, and he's looking at the United States in contrast to France under a constitutional monarchy. Okay. And so overall, what is his impression? He does have critiques, but overall, what is his impression? What does he say about women? What does he say about people and philosophy and practicing philosophy? What does he say about education? Okay, Alexis de Tocqueville. Okay. And so what are their attitudes? So here I have kind of like a little bit of a structure, these questions, okay? And these questions follow kind of like the outline and the talk which I give you in the video directions for the paper. What is Burke's attitude towards the French Revolution? What is his perception of human nature based on his description of common French people? What kind of government should exist, okay, according to Burke? And the same thing with Tocqueville. What is his attitude towards democracy in America? What is his perception of human nature based on his description of Americans? What does he think of the new United States overall? Okay. And how are these two men different? That is what's really important. I want to ask in here. Don't tell me how they're the same. I don't want to know that. I want to know how these two guys are different. Okay. And what type of principles lay behind their attitudes. Okay. What type of, like philosophers such as Hobbes, Rousseau, Locke, how do the ideas from these philosophers influence Tocqueville and Burke? Okay, so yay. All right, and so humanism and revolution. So what is humanism? Humanism is a secular movement that is focused on human values and concerns. That's very broad, right? Okay, and so the Enlightenment's going to focus on things like the rights of the individual, right? Rights of the individual in relation to power, in relation to government, right? In relation to each other, okay? Like this idea of like our rights extend as far out as we can reach our fist, okay? In other words, like, if it's beyond that and we're punching somebody, then that means, we're causing harm, and that's the end of our rights. Okay. And so, yeah. So analogies like that come from the Enlightenment. Okay. And I discussed earlier revolution or economic factors. Sorry, I got ahead of the lecture. So, yeah. So, again, Did the Enlightenment influence the revolutions? Or was economic factors the main driver of the Enlightenment? Okay. I personally tend to think economic factors are the drivers. And the Enlightenment only gave the discourse and the words for people to use and argue and articulate themselves. Okay. And so a lot of this here is, the independence in America, okay, or United States. This right here, how can I say, you probably have gone through a lot of these, okay? And so these are just the highlights, okay? This is kind of, how can I say, it's basic from your freshman year of US history. And so I just kind of highlighted the main events. But we really want to focus on is the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. Okay, because this is what is created. This is the words that are created that are based on Enlightenment values. Okay, and also in itself are contradictions of Enlightenment values. Okay, and so. Okay, that is not a good one. Okay, that is not a good link. There we go. Okay, and so the main thing, I'm not going to go through every single amendment, okay? But the important thing about the Bill of Rights is that it was created to protect the individual it's created to protect the individual from the powers of the government, of a more centralized government. So here, during the Constitutional Convention, there were people who were Federalist and anti-Federalist. And the people who were Federalists were more for centralizing the power of the Constitution, okay? And they wanted an executive branch, like a president. And I thought that creating a president, an executive branch, would be too much like creating a monarch. And they said, well, if we're going to give so much power and more centralized power to a federal government, we need a Bill of Rights to ensure the rights of the individual will be protected, because the federal government has more resources, more power, more than what an individual has. Okay? And so that's the purpose of the Bill of Rights. The Constitution was ratified only because the Bill of Rights was promised to, again, have that balance of the individual and the government. So there's the idea of shared power, okay, that Locke was talking about. And then what ideas and philosophers influence the Declaration of Independence? There we go. Okay, so we have men like Rousseau, okay, and John Locke. Okay, John Locke is going to contribute the ideas like the right to revolution. Okay, the right to revolution is the idea that if the government is usurping your unalienable rights, then you have the right to, like address the situation, like say, hey, we need to have this address. We need to have this address. Okay, well, you know what? Addressing the situation and bringing it up and discussing it and talking about going through all the avenues. Once you've exhausted all the avenues, okay, of reform or redress, then he says, yeah, if you're not being represented, and these avenues to address unalienable rights are not being addressed, then how can I say, then um, the people have the right to revolt, because no longer is power being shared. Okay. And here he talks about natural rights or unalienable rights. And again, this is expressed again through our Bill of Rights, right? Our Bill of Rights come from this idea that we have unalienable natural rights. However, there are also parameters on these rights, even with free speech. Okay, one of the parameters with free speech is that we can't yell fire in a, like in a whatchamacallit, in a movie theater, right? Because that will cause how to say, panic, and people will get trampled on, right? And if you say fire so many times when there's not a fire, it creates a situation where people no longer listen to the word fire eventually, okay? When there actually might be a fire, okay? And so, yeah, so there are parameters to even freedom of speech, okay? We can't, use our speech to cause harm, right? We also have things like libel and libel lawsuits as well, okay? And so, yeah, so we do have natural rights, unalienable rights. The Bill of Rights is based on this idea, but they do have parameters and limitations. Okay. And so here, then we get to men are equal and free. Okay, and the emphasis is put on men. Okay, very much so during this time period. Okay. Again, we're going to be seeing a lot of, how can I say, democracy is not like just flat democracy. Some people argue there's never been democracy because there's never been a true democracy where everyone is represented. And so democracy is something that expands and also contracts. Okay. And so democracy here is, representation of people to the government shared power is not for everyone during this time period. It's for a very narrow amount of the population. Okay. Women are not included. That's just half of the population right there. Okay. And minorities and enslaved peoples are not included. Boom. That's half of the population. That's another, not half, that's another large part of the population. Okay. And during this time period, up until the 1830s, white men who did not own land were not included. It was mainly who were included early on in, United States' democracy were males who owned land. Okay, so that's a very small portion of the population who's being represented. So is that consent to being governed? For all the other rest of the population, can we call that a democracy? Okay. Whew. All right. And so here also our own Constitution. In there we have what was it? We have the 3/4 rule in the Constitution during this period when it was created. And this was the idea that for the southern states to have more representation. 3 out of every 4 enslaved people were counted as population but could not vote. Okay. And this is population that this determines the amount of representatives for each state to go to the lower house of Congress. Okay. And the Constitution in itself establishes, slavery. It doesn't say slavery directly, but it itself recognizes slavery. So again, this is a document for democracy This is a document based on this idea of being consent to being governed, but yet in itself there is a contradiction in that. Okay. Montesquieu, he will contribute the idea of the three branches of government: the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Okay. And then here, how does the Declaration of Independence define natural rights? And so we're going to look at this. Okay. Let's see if this is the one that takes us there. Yes. Okay, that is very tiny right here for me to look at, but you can make the page larger. Shrink that. Okay, so here again, you need to look for keywords like the purpose of the government. It is to secure happiness, right? Okay, and for security. Okay, self-evident that all men are created equal. They are endowed by the Creator with unalienable rights. Our life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he says happiness to be more abstract. Okay, he's John Locke had life, liberty, and property. However, he does not want Jefferson doesn't want it to be construed that the government owes people property. Okay, and so like land. Okay, and so because he believes that selling off public land will bring money to the American government. That's the revenue for the US government. And so here he's going to put happiness because it's more abstract, okay, than land. Because property, back then they thought property, it was land. Okay. And that to secure these rights, the governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So you have these key words and phrases that are very important, okay? That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter and abolish it. Again, that idea of right to revolution from Locke. Okay. And here he's saying that the purpose of government is for people's safety and happiness. All right, and so through here, please read the rest of this, especially this first paragraph in here. These first two paragraphs, okay, are very important. Okay, and the rest of it also, the idea, he has a laundry list of grievances, of reasons why and how our unalienable rights, or our natural rights, have been abused by the crown. Okay, and a lot of these things in here will influence, this laundry list of grievances will influence what will become the Bill of Rights. Okay, because actually this document comes before the Bill of Rights. And let's make this screen big again. There we go. Hold on. Where are we? There we are. All right. And so here we come to the French Revolution, which is after the independence in the United States. So here we have the old regime. And it is like, it is to enlightenment thinkers as privilege is to merit. And it's the old regime, they rely on privilege, on inequality. As enlightenment thinkers, they advocate more equality, and that we are, how can I say, we should be judged by our merit. Okay, like a power, like people should not have power and responsibilities if they're not competent to have those powers and responsibilities. Okay. And so yes, so privilege, the nobility got its power from privilege, from society being unequal. A lot of ideas of race come from this idea of power and privilege and nobility. Okay, they literally thought that they had inherited traits and they were beyond the people in the third estate. Okay, like they're like, yeah, we're better than people of the third estate. Okay, we have a special education, but we also have special inherited traits. Okay, and this kind of type of thinking will also morph into and contribute to modern ideas of race. Okay? And philosophers believe that the government jobs should be filled by people that have merit and competency. Okay, many times nobility held public offices. They had no business holding. They had no type of administrative skills, no type of knowledge of management. And so they didn't really care to be involved in management because nobility kind of like defined itself by not having to work, but they would still hold these government jobs and offices. Okay, and just, yeah. So they would, and so you would have, things that would not run very smoothly. Okay, like, you know, like how can I say, like sanitation. Okay, so what caused the collapse of government finances? Okay, so the French Revolution, it begins first with government finances. Okay, and there is a lot of spending by the crown, by the king, the monarch. Okay, a lot of expenses in foreign wars, like the war that it helped the United States win against the British. Okay, the American Revolution. Okay, also other wars to strengthen its borders. Okay, and then and also spending on a very lavish lifestyle. Okay, and a lot of the finances, government finances, the revenue for that came from the third estate, came from the peasants, like especially the farmers. Okay. And so yeah, debt from the 7 Years' War, funding the American Revolution. Here, let me put my face out of the way. There you go. The American Revolution. Again, that lavish lifestyle at the court of Versailles and other foreign wars. Okay. And then, so King Louis, he calls the States General. Okay. This is Louis the 16th. Okay. 10-5-1. 16. Okay. So King Louis the 16th, he calls the States General. And the States General has not been called in a very long time. And the States General is kind of like a parliament. And it's made of the three estates. The first estate, which is the monarchy, first estate, which is the clergy, the church and the clergy. Second estate is the king and the monarch, okay, and the aristocratic people, the land owning class. And the third estate are the people who do not own land. The third estate has a lot of stratification, okay? It's every, type of people like artists, lawyers, tradesmen, guilds, okay, merchants, okay. Some of these merchants may be very wealthy, and they can compete in wealth with the aristocratic families, but they're still not aristocratic, okay. And so yeah, and so so the third estate can be very stratified, okay. You have upper class professional people and merchants and lawyers and doctors, all the way down to the serf still working the fields for their lords. Okay. And so what is the conflict of the States General is that they don't vote per capita by head. If they can vote per capita by head, the third estate would have so much more power, voting power, because they are the majority of the French population. Okay. But as what happens is that the first and second estate, they vote together. Okay. Against, and each estate has one vote for this first estate, one vote for the second estate, one vote for the third estate, and they always outvote the third estate. Okay. And so the third estate's like, look, you know what, they had proposed, we always get outvoted. We should have our own, representation, a different type of representation where it's per head, per capita vote. And the king didn't like this. The aristocratic people didn't like this. Okay, and the church didn't like this, and so they're like, nope, sorry. And so the third estate went and they made their own assembly. Okay, June 17, 1789. Their own national assembly. Okay. And so who created the National Assembly and the new Constitution? Many of the people who were there that came to create the National Assembly and new Constitution, what we call it, the tennis court oath, where the new National Assembly met was on a tennis court. And they, many of them were lawyers. Okay, many of them were lawyers. And more of the upper stratification of the third estate. Okay, the National Assembly is dissolved, and then especially peasant women of France, they go and they storm the Bastille, that is known as the Bastille was the prison, and many times it would hold political prisoners and people that were just, how can I say, that were arbitrary, that were thrown in jail for arbitrary reasons. Okay. Voltaire ended up staying in the Bastille because he had an argument with some aristocratic noblemen. Okay. And so, yeah, I think he ended up in the Bastille twice before he had to make his exodus to England. Okay. And so the Bastille was a place where people were just arbitrarily held in there and were put into jail. And so, taking apart the Bastille was very symbolic. They also had some weapons in the Bastille as well, but it was very symbolic because they took apart the whole building, and only a square stands there today. And so July 14th is known as is the Independence Day for France, Bastille Day. Okay. And so the women again lead the charge to the Bastille. The peasants, they revolt, especially in the countryside. Okay, throughout the countryside in France, peasants revolt. They go to the lords of the manor house. The manor house is, again, the center house of the whole estate of land that's owned by the lord. And the peasants live on the corner of that whole estate. Okay. And they go to the lord's manor and take the lords out of their house, beat them up. I don't know if any are killed, though. I'm not so sure. But they beat them up and pillage the manor house. Okay. And this was how can I say, very chaotic, and a way of, how can I say, challenging that feudal structure of society. Okay. And so here we have the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. And this was written, again, by the National Assembly, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, also known as the Rights of Man for short. Okay, and I would also put emphasis on the word man, okay, because it does not include women. And the rights of man is very much influenced by Thomas Jefferson. He, how can I say, he was the advisor for this document. Okay, and oh, I forgot what the other guy's name is. I can't. Oh yeah, the Marquis de Lafayette. Okay, the Marquis de Lafayette. We're gonna come to his picture pretty soon. Okay, and he is also influential in drafting the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. So yes. Okay. And what challenges did the new French government face? Why did they end up executing Louis XVI in 1791? They're going to face the new French government, okay? The new French Republic. Okay. The new French Republic. Ooh, okay, let me think here. I need some coffee. That's really quick. Maybe some vitamins. Here we go. Yeah. Sorry, my brain needs some calories. Okay. Okay. So from foreign countries. Yeah. So what kind of problems do they face? The new republic was threatened by a lot of monarchies. There's still this is, French Republic is the first of its kind in the European continent. Okay. The monarchies were very aware of what happened in the colonies. In the United States, the British, before it was the United States, they were considered the British colonies in America. And the monarchs were very aware of this upset of power, this overturning of power. Okay. And so they saw the French Republic and they're like, oh no, it's come here to the European continent. These, peasants are going to want their rights. Okay. They're going to want representation. And that means that monarchs and aristocrats will lose their privilege. They don't want to lose their power and privilege. Okay. And so the monarchs in all these other countries in Europe are going to try to subvert the new French Republic. They don't want the new French Republic to be successful. They want to send in spies, armies, everything they can to undermine the new French Republic. Okay. And they ended up executing Louis XVI because Marie Antoinette wrote to her family, the Habsburgs, in Austria, asking for help. She said, will you send an army to put us up back on the throne? And Marie Antoinette was executed for treason, and Louis XVI was also executed as well. Okay. And, she wrote to her family in Austria, and they also tried to escape. They were kind of like imprisoned at Versailles, or was it the Louvre? It was either the Louvre or Versailles. And they were being held, and, people didn't know what to do with them. Like, should we have a constitutional monarchy? Should we execute them? It was all up in the air until they decided to escape. And they tried escaping to Austria, and they got caught, and they discovered her letter, and yeah, and so they were executed. Okay. And so yeah, again, spies from foreign countries, overthrown nobility wanted to bring back the monarchy throughout France too. Okay. And other monarchies did not want to see the French. Okay, I already said that. How did the National Convention fight to fight off foreign invaders? Okay, the National Convention, they are going to recruit people by appealing to their civic duty. Like, this is our country now. Okay, France is ours, and we are going to be represented in government. We are going to be not subjects who, have to serve a crown. We are going to be citizens that share power with the national governments. We're going to have shared power instead of being ruled over. Okay? So you don't want this new power, new freedom to be taken from you. So they appeal to people's sense of patriotism and civic duty to get into the French army and fight. Okay? And so they had a new national army that was filled with recruited volunteers who were citizens that fought to preserve their country and civil liberties. Before, the armies had conscripts, and they were subjects that fought for a monarch. Okay, and in one of Voltaire's stories, we see this critique. Okay, it is The World as It Is. There's a section, the very beginning of the story, where he's asking soldiers, why are you fighting? Who are you fighting for? What purpose are you fighting for? Okay, and the soldier's like, I don't know. I'm just fighting for this guy. And this other guy is going to pay me more tomorrow, so I'm going to go over there and fight for him instead. Okay, and those were mercenaries. Okay, and he was critiquing the whatchamacallit, Depression King Frederick the Great, okay, and his big huge army. Okay, and so people were fighting for a monarch. They didn't feel like necessarily like it was for themselves. Okay, we're going to have the Paris Commune. They're going to bring in more radical pressure to the movement to revolution. Okay, and the countries that wanted to again plot and undermine the French Republic were, a coalition of armies: Austria, Prussia, Spain, Portugal, Britain, then the Dutch Republic. Okay, and we're going to have the Committee of Public Safety take over. And what does this committee do? Okay, they're going to take more control, especially in Paris, because in Paris, the French Revolution is happening, and you have to you overthrow a government, you overthrow the people in power. Now what do? How do you rule when you've never ruled yourself? Okay, how do you make things happen and make things work? Okay, so there's getting rid of an evil power, but how do you yourselves establish a new one? Okay, and how do you deal with critiques when establishing a new power? Okay, because it's not going to be perfect. And so people were kind of, saying like, hey, the price of bread is still really high. We can't eat. Okay, so if people, how can I say, if people criticize the new French Republic, a lot of times they just throw them into jail. The woman said, hey, You know, what about my rights as a woman? Okay. Or hey, what about the price of bread? We want to eat. We're starving. Okay. Does critiquing the price of bread can send someone to jail? Because that's how part of the revolution began. People were starving. And so the Committee for Public Safety, they say, okay, we're having a lot of, you know, kind of chaos going on here, and we need to bring things under control and control all these people who are, you know, demanding everything. So we have the Committee for Public Safety, and they're created in 1793, is directed by Maximilien Robespierre. Okay, he was an important part of the tennis court oath. And he himself, how can I say, is going to end up kind of having a, how can I say, like a power trip in his own way. So yeah, he kind of gets carried away with power. And so he ends up at the end of the Reign of Terror, he ends up being guillotined himself in 1794. And so there is a lot of people building up in the prisons. And so we're going to have what is called the Reign of Terror. And first, they're going to be beheading people who are prior people who were monarchs, who were not monarchs, but who were aristocratic people, noble people, lords. Antoine de Condorcet, I think he was one of them. But he was very, how can I say, even though he was a lord, he came up with a lot of very forward intellectual ideas and Enlightenment ideas. And so Reign of Terror, though, is just going to behead a lot of people who even just question power, like Olympe de Gouges. She ended up being beheaded. Okay. So here, the Reign of Terror in Paris was 9 months. It's also going to be in other places, in other towns and cities across France. Okay, but in Paris, it was 9 months. And there were a total of 16,000 people guillotined. Okay, let me try to do my math calculator here. Okay, I think it came down to like 64 or 65 people per day that were guillotined. 16,000, one more zero, divided by 9 equals 1,777. Okay, that's per month, divided by 4. 444 people per week. And a week is 7 days. Yeah, 63.49 people per day were executed. Okay. And again, outside of Paris, there were more. There are other cities across France, not just Paris, right? Okay, like Lyon, and Marseille. And so, yeah, the prisons filled up, people went to jail. Some of them, again, were actual spies, and some of them were, again, just start questioning the price of bread. Okay. And so this is from the Rights of Man. And again, I have the whole entire thing listed down here. And it's from the Law Yale source. Excuse me. Okay, and it says here, men are born and remain free and equal in rights. Social distinctions can be established only for the common benefit. The aim of every political association is the conservation of the natural imprescriptible rights of man. These rights are liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. And the resistance to oppression is really very important key words to understand here, okay? And political power is of the people. Government is there to protect the people's basic rights, okay? And it appeals to this idea of natural rights as well, okay? And Olympe de Gouges, what did she say in the Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Female Citizen? So here we have the rights of man and the male citizen, okay? And she's going to draft something that's similar to the rights of man. All the very similar language, but in areas where it says man, she's going to say woman, okay? And in this, she's critiquing that women are not included in the rights of man, and that women need to be included as citizens. She says, you all come to this rights of man, but what's missing in this document? Women. Our citizenship, we're part of this country too. Okay. And she is going to demand this, and the National Assembly is just going to laugh at her and send her on her merry way, and she's going to keep making noise about this. She's a writer. She's a playwright. She's not going to be quiet and go gently into the good night. No. And so finally, they don't like her being vocal about this. And so, yeah, she ends up being guillotined as well. Okay. Here is the Marquis de Lafayette. Okay, that's the Marquis de Lafayette. Okay, he's part of the National Assembly, part of creating the rights of man. Okay. Here I have a link here for the Khan Academy. And again, I'm going to post this as a PDF for you all. Okay. So that way you can also access these resources. Okay. And then below I have a BBC documentary is about the purpose of art. Is art used as a symbol of state power for the monarchy? Why was it destroyed? What was the meaning and the purpose of the street art? I need to double check to see if I have the same documentary in the unit. Okay. And then how does this pertain to the theme challenges in modern culture? Okay. And so here we're going to be looking at street art and the purpose of art. Okay. And why did people vandalize state-sponsored art? Okay. And so there's this one. I'm going to press on this so that way I can make sure that it is in your. Okay, we don't need that. Okay, we're going to come back to the PowerPoint. I'm going to make sure that that documentary is in the unit to double check it. And then we have the Haitian Revolution. Yay. Hold on. I need a puppy time. There we go. Oh, there we go. There we go. Puppy time. I need some puppy time. Okay. And so the Haitian Revolution. Okay, Haiti is a large sugar plantation, and it was a colony of France. Okay. And so what inspired the slave revolts? And here we have the rights of man. Okay. Haiti is a very stratified society. You have like a small percentage of white French slave owners, plantation owners. Okay. And then there are people who are classified at this time with the word mulatto. Okay, we don't call people that today, but at that time period they used the term mulatto, and these were people who were part French, white French, and part of African descent. Okay, who had varying different statuses. Okay, they didn't have citizen status, but some of them may have been freed people, some of them may have been enslaved people. Okay, and a lot of it has to do with the idea of passing. Okay, and so the rights of man here is, people in the colony, in this colony of France at this time, they hear about the rights of man and this idea of being able to fight against oppression. Okay, and the people, the white plantation, French white plantation owners, they ask, well, does that rights of man, does that pertain to us in the colonies? Are we citizens of the French Republic? They question, like, hey, there's this new document. Does it apply to us? And then the people who are of mixed ancestry, who are both French and of African descent, and they go, well, what about us? Does that apply to us as well? Okay. And then enslaved people on the island are like, wait. We have the right to fight against oppression? What? And so they revolted. Okay. And so they revolted. The capital at that time was Saint Dominique. Okay. One of the leaders of the revolt was Toussaint L'Ouverture. Okay. And in France, they had abolitionist movements. Okay. One was Friends of Blacks in France that wanted to abolish slavery within France. And then in 1794, they thought, well, how about we also abolish slavery in the colonies, in our extended colonies? And then February 4th, 1794, the National Convention abolished slavery. Okay. And so by January 1st, 1804, Haiti had become an independent nation state. Okay. And so how did the reaction to the Haitian Revolution point out the ironies of the Enlightenment? Okay. And so a lot of European, Haiti was, is very in the heart of the Caribbean. It is a very important part on the trade routes between, and it has sugar, which is a very important commodity in this trade route between, I think in high school they would have taught to you as a triangular trade, but it is also the triangular slave trade, and it went from Europe to Africa to the Americas, back to Europe. Okay, that's just very simplified. But Haiti was a very important part of that trade. And many European nations refused to trade with Haiti. They had an embargo. And this was part of trying to force this new republic, this new nation built from a slave revolt. They wanted to punish them for revolting and wanted to undermine the success of a new Haitian free republic. Okay? Right, Bibis. And what was the response of the United States? Okay, especially when it came to refugees from Haiti. And it's very similar to the response that we're having today. Really, one congressman in the federal Congress said, it's very hypocritical for Jefferson to not want to accept former Black enslaved peoples. Thomas Jefferson, he said, we can have the white French, the French white refugees, they can come to, New Orleans, since there's already a tradition and a French community there. But Jefferson did not want Black refugees from Haiti to come to the United States, where he feared that they would also incite a rebellion in the South of the United States. And so one of the congressmen said, that is so hypocritical, coming from the man who said that all men are created equal. Okay. And then I made the comment that relates to today, because today we still have a lot of Haitian refugees who want to claim asylum who are being turned away. Okay. And so here I have, again, a link here. And I have these links for you. You don't have to read them all. You can just skim over it in like 2 or 3 minutes. But also, if you want to come back and learn more, you can. You can download these PDFs and save them for future reference, especially if you're going to be writing about these topics. Oops, I clicked on the link by accident. Here we go. All right, and so I need to show you all writers of this time period related to these ideas who are building arguments on these ideas by John Locke, who are building arguments on documents created on these Enlightenment ideals. So documents created by Enlightenment ideals would be the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Rights of Man. These are all documents of a new republic that have their foundations in Enlightenment philosophy. Okay. And so we have people like Olaudah Equiano. Okay, I'm gonna put her down there. I love you, my babies. I love you. Yes. Say hi to everybody. You want to say hi? Say hi. Yes. Okay. Come on, my precious honey. You can sit there. You could eat the rest of yourself on the bench. There we go. There we go. No. Okay, wait, hold on. Come over here. I don't have to hold you. Okay, there we go. And so, Olaudah Equiano, okay, he was born as Gustavus Vasa. That was his given name. Okay, that was not, I would say that is not his name that he had for himself. Okay. And he lived from 1745 to 1797, so he lives during this time period, okay? And he was kidnapped, okay? He was only 12 years old. He was from Nigeria and put into the slave trade. And he crossed the Middle Passage on a ship, which was very dangerous because they would pack people into the hull of the ship real tightly, many times not feed them or give them enough water, and people died. Okay, it was a very traumatic, very dangerous, very cruel experience. Okay, and so that Middle Passage, that ship ride from Africa to the continent of Africa to the Caribbean. Okay. And he was purchased and sold several times. Finally, he was sold to a merchant, a sea merchant. Okay. And they traveled they traveled, you know, through the triangular trade route, the triangular slave trade route, and he himself was enslaved working on one of the ships. Okay. Finally, he was able to do extra work outside of his work time that he had. He was able to at this time period through, you know, what laws that they had. He was able to save up some money, do some extra work, and buy himself out of slavery. Okay. And after that, he went and he lived in London as a freedman. Okay. And there he was an abolitionist. He joined an abolitionist group called the Sons of Africa. And they were people of African descent in London organizing an abolitionist movement. Okay. And he wrote this book here, The Interesting Narrative and Other Writing. So he taught himself to read and write. And he published this book. I think it was the 1790s that he did this. Okay. Let's see. Does it say on the book itself? 1789, the same year as the French Revolution. Let me get this back to its original. Okay. Oh, gosh darn it. I can't shrink the page. Here we go. What if I did... okay. All right. And so his autobiography, in his autobiography, he describes the cruelty of slavery. Okay? And by being able to describe the cruelty of slavery, here, he's telling people why this needs to end. Okay. And so his autobiography becomes instrumental in passing the Slave Trade Act. And the Slave Trade Act just ends the slave trade, the trading of slaves. Okay. It does not end ownership. Okay. But the slave trade abolition, wait, is it Slave Trade Act? And then there is a slave trade or a slavery abolition in 1833, and that ends the ownership of slavery throughout the British Empire. Okay, not the American Empire, the British Empire. Okay. In the United States, we have Phyllis Whitley, and she also made important literary contributions as well. First of all, she is the first Black American woman to publish in the United States. Yay, right? Okay. And she's not the first one to write something. I'm sure there are people who were, other women who were writing, okay, Black women who were writing. And in the North, she was well, first of all, her name comes from the ship that brought her to Boston, and she was bought by the Whitley family. Okay, and in Boston at this time, according to the laws, later on the laws become more strict depending on the state. Like in the 1800s, like especially in the South, the laws become more strict by state, where they don't allow enslaved people to learn how to read and write. Okay, but she lived in Boston here, and with a family that encouraged her to learn how to read and write. And so she was encouraged to learn how to read and write. And her first poem she wrote in 1767 in an elegy to George Whitefield, who was a white abolitionist. Okay. And then she will write, this is the title of her first book, was Poems on Various Subjects and Religious and Moral. And so she's taken to Britain to get this book published, and she has how can I say, she has sponsorship from white British people and white American people that will help support her in getting this published and sponsoring the publication. Okay. And in that book, a lot of her influences are other poets English poets that she had read. Of course, her African heritage is part of this as well, and religion. Okay. And again, she supported in her writing, she supported American independence. But she also critiqued, the leaders of the American independence because they were still slave owners, especially George Washington. George Washington was a slave owner. And so she was like, well, I very much support our American independence and support, the right to revolt and everything. But, we also need to, just not stop there. We need to continue on and be consistent and also eliminate slavery. Okay. And so she cannot get a second book published. Okay. And she died during childbirth. And I put that the way how she died because it's very important, because still within the United States, I mean, before 1900, how can I say, childbirth was very dangerous for a lot of women. But still persists today that childbirth is very, very dangerous for Black women in the United States. Okay, they have a very high maternal mortality rate. Okay, and that has to do with a lot of inequalities in healthcare. And so again, it's significant that to today's context that she died during childbirth. Okay. Whew. Okay, and so after the revolution, the French Revolution, after Napoleon Bonaparte was, beheaded, not beheaded, I'm sorry, after Maximilien Robespierre was beheaded, what happened? Okay, and so Napoleon, he was a general in the French army, and he rose to power as first as the first consul. Okay, and he promoted this idea of a civil code, that there is written laws, and that we're all citizens equally under that civil code. Well, men are all equally citizens under that civil code. Okay. And he gets rid of serfs and feudalism. Okay. And he promotes the idea of religious tolerance. Okay. He also creates a central administration, centralized government with offices where people are supposed to be appointed according to their merit and talent. Okay. And then there's going to be a second and third coalitions. Again, monarchies that want to see Napoleon fail. Okay. And Napoleon, he is going to expand the French Empire. Okay. And so again, he goes into dependent states like Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, Swiss, Warsaw, the Rhineland. He also goes all the way to Austria as well. Okay. And how is this important to the neoclassical style and to the humanities? A lot of people, especially like Beethoven. Beethoven lived in Austria, and he, how can I say, Beethoven was somebody who always liked a lot of his, how can I say, a lot of his students were aristocratic women, and he would teach them the piano. That's how you'd make money. And he always fell in love with them. But these aristocratic women, they would never have anything to do with him because he had no aristocratic blood. Okay, he was like a teacher, like, you know, there's a gardener or the painter. Okay, they were people that worked, you know, in the household, like the cook and the gardener. And they were not, you know, they were not aristocratic people to how can I say, to marry. Okay. And so yeah, so he was very much close proximity to a lot of aristocratic people, but never invited in any sort of intimate way. And so he's very much, how can I say, very much how can I say, cognizant about inequality, right? And aristocratic privilege, because he sees that the way that they live is allowed in their homes, but not allowed to be part of their homes. Okay. And so here, you know, he really sees the oncoming of Napoleon's army as liberation from aristocratic society. He's like, oh yeah, Napoleon's going to come here. He's going to bring all of these ideals of a republic, of civil code, of, you know, getting rid of serfdom, okay, institute more religious tolerance. And he sees this, you know, Napoleon as this ideal, bringing all of these things as a liberator, bringing all of these things to Austria. And what happens is that Napoleon ends up crowning himself as Emperor of France. And when Napoleon crowns himself as Emperor of France, Beethoven included, and many people saw Napoleon as being a traitor, no longer representing the Third Estate, but making himself part of the Second Estate, of the aristocratic people. Okay. And betraying all these ideas of a civil code and living in a republic. Okay. And so here we are at the art, and we will begin this one another day. So, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.